So the more porous your identity, right, the more you feel the world outside of you flowing through you and taking you over, right, the more varied and the more intense your emotional reactions, and with it, the more varied and intense your emotional expressions, your language, and your behavior, as opposed to the disciplines of the post-enlightenment buffered identity, where no matter what's going on around you, you feel that you have the powers of kingly reason on your side and that you can construct a path that's good and right and pro-social and upstanding. So I think there's a different physiology that goes with the buffered identity, which is the left-wing, secular humanist, liberal, academic elite way of experiencing life, as opposed to the porous identity, which is the traditional identity, the nationalist identity, the tribal identity, the right-wing identity. So Pat Buchanan, for example, is incredibly likable, and that's because he is much more spontaneous in that he has this porous identity, and so he reacts much more in the moment. His reactions, his emotions, his speech are reflective of what's going on right now, as opposed to a stilted, disciplined, buffered identity presentation. And so many talk show hosts have found that they have personally enjoyed their right-wing guests much more than their left-wing guests, because their left-wing guests are much more stilted and disciplined and reflexive in the things that they say and do, while their right-wing guests with their porous identities are much more present, much more authentic, much more raw, much more vulnerable. So there were a couple of years where I flirted with a Marxist outlook, and I enjoyed provoking people by telling them that I was an atheistic communist. And my self-presentation was different in those years compared to my usually right-wing attitudes to life. I enjoyed the power and pleasure of conspicuous compassion for downtrodden groups. And so I wonder, are there physiological changes that come with adopting a more right-wing or a more left-wing attitude? Right? Does people's physiognomy change? Does their muscular alignment change? Because when you think a thought, right, it changes your muscular alignment, right? There is more tension in your musculature when you're thinking as opposed to when you are free from trying to develop a thought. And emotions are most available when we're in a particular alignment of our musculature. And so if you are more porous in your identity and you are overtaken by giddiness, by hope, by rage, by despair, right, that is going to manifest itself in the alignment of your musculature, in your stature, in your posture, in your ways of speaking and being. So these things work in multiple directions, right? Your cognitive structures, your physiology, your thinking, your politics and your religion are going to affect your language and behavior and your emotions are going to affect your thinking, your alignment, your musculature, and your public displays.